Hey, what is up guys, Wei Wei here and welcome to Minitarum Wargaming. Today in this video, I'm going to show you how to build industrial bases. When you think of industrial, you would think concrete, metal, dirt and grime. But with these themes in mind, building industrial bases is relatively easy and can be done with minimal effort. The materials you would need for this project are thin and thick cardboard, straws and small tubes, plastic mesh canvas, bits of sprue, wires, foam core and detailed plastic sheet, which in this case is a diamond pattern. Oh, and don't forget the bases. The tools required are a hobby knife, a pair of clippers, a pair of pliers, a pair of scissors, a hole punch, a metal ruler, and to stick it all down, a tube of plastic and super glue. For our first industrial themed base, we are going to use a 25mm round base. Grab yourself some thick card and trace the top of the base on it before cutting it out with scissors. Put down some super glue and stick the thick card down on the base. Flip the base over and use your hobby knife to trim the excess card overhanging the top of the base. Reinforce the trimmed edge with super glue. Measure out some thin card and use your ruler and hobby knife to cut the card in a thin strip. Roughly measure how much of the strip you'll need to cut off and neaten the ends. Glue the strip down on the top of your base with super glue. Grab a hole punch and punch out some bits of card. This will represent rivets and bolts on the strip. Carefully apply small drops of super glue and a small card circle evenly across the strip. There you have it, a simple 25mm base. Now let's try a 32mm round base. We will start with some thin card. Trace the top of the base like the base before and cut it out. Be sure to cut out two tops, as we will cut strips from one of them later. Once cut, glue a whole disc to the base and trim the edges as done with the previous base. With your detailed plastic card, trace out a portion of it with your base and cut it out. Glue it on top of the base with super glue and trim the edges. With the stripped pieces of card, find a piece that can be cut into an appropriate size strip. Then glue it along the plastic card part of the base, then trim off the excess. Grab some sprue and measure it up. Cut it to size and clean off the edges before gluing it on the top of the plastic card with some plastic glue. Make sure the edges are parallel to the edge of the card you have glued earlier, and trim off any excess. Get back on the hole punch and dot out a few more card circles. Once again, carefully dot the top of the sprue with super glue and apply the dots evenly across. We'll now add some cables to this base, and to do this we'll need to cut some wires. Be sure to cut the lengths correctly, as trimming metal wires is quite challenging once they are glued. Attach the wires with super glue. Once dry, grab a bit of plastic mesh and trace out the remainder of your base, then cut it out with clippers. Glue down the piece of plastic mesh with super glue. Make sure to clip off any overhang, and there you have it, a 32mm industrial base. Let us move over now to the 40mm round base. For this base, we'll start by using foam core. Mark out a portion with the top of your base and cut the foam core with your hobby knife. Clean up the edges and glue the foam core down with super glue. Trim off any overhang, then trace out a piece of card and cut it out with your ruler and hobby knife. Apply some super glue and attach it to the foam core. This will create a flat backing for later. Curve some thin card around the edge of the foam core. Trace out the amount you need, then cut it out with your ruler and hobby knife. Super glue it to the edge of the foam core. Once the glue is set, trace out the foam core portion of the base on plastic card and cut it out. Align it to the top, then glue it down with super glue and trim off any excess. Apply some super glue on each of the ends that meet the edges from the card of the plastic card. This will reinforce it and bond it all together. When the super glue is cured, trace out some thin card to add to the front of the panel that we've done from earlier. Stick it on with super glue and trim off any excess. Do the same and add a strip to the top edge. Once the glue is dried, trim off any overhang. Grab a small cardboard tube, mark off and cut the appropriate length and glue it on. To support the sides, clip bits of sprue and mount them on equal lengths of strips of card to the sides of the tube. Trim and clean any exposed edges. For the upper level floor, start by gluing on an upright piece of sprue, then 2 more pieces and superglue them on top of the tube from earlier. Make sure they are both equally level as they dry. With a plastic mesh, trace out the top level grading and cut out the shape. Glue it to the top of the plastic supports on the tube and make sure there is no overhang. Grab a paper straw and, like the tube before, mark off and cut it to the appropriate lengths. We are going to make a broken pipe, so break up the top end of the pipe and the joining end on the other section of pipe, then glue them down with superglue. Measure off a bit of thin card, cut it and glue it down as another bit of edging. To fill the hollow broken pipe, clip bits of wire and bend them and insert them into the openings of the pipe. Apply superglue to hold them in place. Grab your hole punch once again and produce a few more cardboard circles, then add them as bolts to your card strips. To add some extra industrial details, I'll be using Green Stuff Wells plastic gear set. This is a small bag of variously sized plastic gears, which are a great scale for miniatures. Let us add 2 of them and glue them to the top level with some superglue. And there you have it! You have now built a complex industrial themed base for your miniatures. And now to painting. To begin, start by priming your bases, as this will provide a good surface for your model paint to stick on. Now we have all 3 bases primed, let's start with the 25mm base. Place it in a painting handle and grab some Mechanicus Standard Grey and base coat the entire base but the strip. Then grab some lead belcher and base coat the strip silver. Shade the grey and silver areas with Nuln Oil. Be sure to only line the edges of the silver to avoid over darkening it. Once the wash is dried, hit the grey areas with a dry brush of Dawnstone. Get some Agrax Earthshade and soil bits of the grey areas and add some brown to the edges of the silver. Then brighten the grey areas with a dry brush of Administratum Grey. Let's paint some hazard stripes. Grab some Avalon Sunset and paint the yellow line parallel to the silver strip. Well, I forgot to hit record when painting the black lines across, but this is done with Abaddon Black. Be sure to start thin and work your way up to a stripe thickness that you are happy with. Make sure to touch up both the black and yellow so they are nice and bold. Next, with some White Scars White, paint up some lines on the opposite side of the silver strip. This will be some floor markings, so add other minor details like smaller lines, letters, or numbers. To neaten the base up, we can add some black edges to our hazard stripe and some highlights to our silver strip. To add the highlights, I used a tiny amount of Ironbreaker silver to mark parts of the silver strip. Paint the rim of the base black, and presto, you have an industrial themed 25mm base. Now let's try the 32mm base. With the base hot in the painting handle, begin by dry brushing the entire base with lead belcher. Once dry, grab a grubby old brush and get technical by dotting out some typhus corrosion around the base. Then, to get even more technical, scoop out some Agrellan Earthshade and place it around the base. I also forgot to film me applying it to the base, so here it is on the base. Agrellan Earth is a Citadel technical paint, which has a crackling effect when dry, so apply it thick for good results. To speed up the drying time, I'm going to use a hairdryer. Once dry, apply a shade of Agrax Earth to seal the cracked Agrellan Earth in place to stop it from flaking by accident. Next, dry brush some Runefang Steel over the Agrellan Earth areas to give it a slight metallic appearance. Then, shade the edges and some sections with Nuln Oil. To bring out how rusty this metallic industrial area is, grab some Riser Dust and dry brush the entire base. Bring out some Cassandora Yellow and shade in the areas of the base you wish to have a little more, well, yellow. Touch up the base with a noticeably light dry brushing of Stormhost Silver. Go over and soil up the base with some Agrax Earthshade. Then get technical by adding some Blood for the Blood God on the ground with a raggedy brush from earlier. Paint the base rim black, and there you have it, a completed 32mm base. I hope your miniatures get a tetanus shot after standing on that base. And lucky last, let's paint up the 40mm base. Get a grip on your base and give the entire base a dry brushing of lead belcher, then shade the entire base with Nuln Oil. Once dry, dry brush Runelord Brass over the top floor grating, gears, and lower pipe. Then give the overall base a unifying highlight with a dry brushing of Ironbreaker. Then give the damaged pipe a tint of yellow with Cassandora Yellow. In the theme of yellow, with Avalon Sunset, paint the strip on the top level, as we'll be painting another hazard stripe. At least this time, I filmed me painting the black stripes along the yellow. Moving back to the damaged pipe, we'll now be colouring it with Calgar Blue. Once all the blue is dry, shade the silver and recessed parts with Nuln Oil. Let us focus on the lower metal strips, as we'll be painting them red with Mephiston Red. To give the back of the base a bit of colour, I used Biltan Green Shade to add a tint while keeping the dry brush silver underneath visible through the green shade. For some reason, I decided to paint the blue again on the pipe in a layer of rust grey. I didn't like it once the pipe was finished, and I thought it was much too bright. When I finished on the blue, I touched up the Mephiston Red with another coat. After finishing that, grab some Moot Green and water it down on a palette slightly before applying it to the green areas on the back of the base, and then on the front areas in front of the red strips. To fix my blue mistakes, I got some Ironbreaker and applied it in patches over the pipe. I also applied it as tiny chip details around the coloured sections of the base, and as highlights over the silver parts. With a smaller brush, get a drop of Agrax Earthshade and touch up the edges of any bolts and rivets on the base. To create a dirty, decayed look, add some Typhus Corrosion around the base, particularly in areas you want to add rust to later. Continuing my blue pipe fix, I painted over the rust grey areas with Oldorf Guard Blue. Once dry, I used Drakenhof Nightshade and washed all the areas of blue down to darken them. Time to start rusting it up with Riser Rust. Dry brush this over the Typhus Corrosion areas you applied earlier. When everything is nice and orange, let's bring tiny glints of silver back to the top with a super light dry brush of Runefang Steel. To begin our toxic sludge area, start by painting the base with a mix of different greens. For this I used Moot Green, Warpstorm Glow, and Warg Flesh. The way I got the glossy watery look was with Gloss Technical Ard Coat. After each layer of Ard Coat, I would paint small patches of Moot Green and Warpstorm Glow. Keep adding layers till your toxic water looks murky and cloudy with different toxic green layers. To add the toxic water coming out of the pipe, I used a hot glue gun to create the flow of water running out from it. Once the glue is dry, paint the hot glue in colours of your toxic waters the same way you did the rest of the water. To add extra toxic effect, try using Hex Wraith Flame, Tesseract Glow, and Nurgle's Rot among the layers of Ard Coat to add a more varied look of toxicity. Once you are happy with your toxic waters, finish off the base by painting the rim black. Ta-da! You now have a super detailed 40mm industrial base with a level of height and a toxic persona. I hope this video inspires you to try out making industrial bases for your miniatures. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button. And if you have any friends that are also in the hobby, please make sure to share this with them. For more videos, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification icon so you're notified whenever I upload a new video. If you want to follow me on social media, all the links will be in the description below. Thank you, and happy hobbying!